Hey everyone, me again, something a little different today. I know I start quite a few of my videos that way. In my defense, it's always been true. Today it's different in that we're not dealing with a milsurp or even something milsurp adjacent, like say that M63 Mauser I looked at a little while back. Of course, you could argue this design does have some military lineage, but I don't really want to get bogged down in that discussion. It's just a very strange, unusual handgun that I haven't really seen anybody feature, so I figured, well, why not just make a video on it? So this is a Sterling Arms Model 287 PPL. Many people have heard of the manufacturer Sterling Arms. Of course, they're probably best known for their Model 302. These are pocket pistols in 25 Auto and 22 LR. This one is the 22, of course. These are, fairly common. You can find them pretty easily today. But it's a manufacturer that has kind of a checkered reputation. They often get lumped in with the Ring of Fire manufacturers like Bryco, Jennings, Cobra, Phoenix, those guys. It's not a 100% fair association in that Sterling did rely largely on all steel construction. I think they did have some alloy models, but they didn't do, pot metal guns so much compared to, say, the others that I just mentioned. Some of their models are not terribly unreliable as well. They do get a little bit sketchy in terms of reputation as far as how safe they are to carry with a loaded chamber. There were lawsuits and controversies about that sort of thing. That could be a whole video of its own. I really don't want to get into it too much. This is just kind of about this specific gun. So Sterling entered the market basically making direct copies of high standard 22 semi-auto target pistols. So if you ever see something called the Sterling Husky or something like that out in the wild, that would be kind of an example of one of those. Around 1968, they decided, well, we could try to adapt that design into a 380 caliber, pocket size, concealable self-defense type handgun. And that's exactly what this is. That's what a model PPL happens to be. And so there would have been a lot of demand in those days for something like that. So first off, of course, we had the Gun Control Act of 1968 pass, which restricted the importation of, tiny and pocket-sized handguns. So there was kind of a need for a domestic replacement. Of course, the late 1960s were getting to be kind of a gritty time in a lot of major U.S. Cities. Not unlike today, I guess. But so there's just kind of demand out there for self-defense type implements. So that's kind of it for historic context. I guess let's go over some of the features, including what makes this gun so unusual and remarkable, and perhaps discuss what features actually kind of killed it. So as I mentioned, it's in 380 caliber. It is, of course, hammer fired. It is single action, so of course, if the hammer is down, pulling the trigger does nothing. It is fed from a single stack magazine with a heel release. And there's an interesting little cutout here at the bottom so that you can grasp the floor plate of the magazine. Magazine capacity is actually only 5 rounds. There's an article on these that claims 8 rounds. I don't know where they got that information. They did confess in that they never got a chance to shoot the gun, so presumably that means they didn't load it. But no, you could compress the spring to capacity, and you cannot squeeze even a 6th round in there. So 5-round magazine, fairly small, but again, it's a very compact gun. Where we start getting a little bit unusual is the safety. So the safety is this cross bolt type safety kind of in front of the trigger, above the trigger. Right now it is in safe. Flipping it the other way would switch it to fire. Not the most unergonomic thing, of course, because it is within reach of the trigger finger. It's not a very great solution either because there's actually not a very positive click or detent when you switch. So it seems like in a soft holster, it would be fairly easy for that to get knocked into one position or the other, so not great. And it's kind of a lose-lose proposition in that if they made this like a harder, like a heavier button to press, this motion just doesn't have as much strength with it as, say, flipping a thumb safety would. So I'm not sure that this was a good idea. There are no other controls or levers or switches on either side. The slide lock is not internal. It doesn't have one. That is to say, it will not lock open on an empty magazine. Of course, speaking of not locking, it is also straight blowback operated, so there is no breech locking mechanism either. At this point, you may be wondering, with only a 5-round magazine capacity, maybe 6 if you're crazy enough to trust that safety, why did they even bother to make such a thing? Why does this even exist? Well, you got to consider that this was again the 1960s. One of the probably the most popular carry options in those days would have been something like a five-shot snub nose 38 revolver, something along the lines of, say, this Charter Arms off-duty. It's hard to tell from this picture. Maybe I can stack them like so, but the Charter Arms is actually considerably larger in almost every dimension, both height-wise, length-wise. It's thicker too, and this is a five-shot 38, so it would have been relatively compact, I suppose. It's also smaller and lighter than something like a PPK, which would have existed at the time. So it is relatively pocketable, and the way that it achieves this compactness, of course, is not through any sort of miracle of engineering or space age materials or anything like that. They just gave it extremely short barrel length. That is to say, this might be the shortest barrel on any production handgun ever. You may be thinking, wait a minute, what about those NAA mini revolvers? There's a version of those in 22 short. Yes, even shorter than those. The barrel length on those is 1.125 inches, and the barrel length on this is exactly 1 inch. This, of course, does come at all the costs that you would expect. Accuracy is reported to be dismal on these. Of course, you're not getting much velocity out of a barrel this short, or even much stability. These were widely reported to keyhole as well. A manufacturer like Sterling, who has a background in target pistols, would no doubt have noticed this during testing. So just to kind of engage in a little speculation here, I'm thinking that they probably figured that since this was meant to be a very up-close and personal self-defense type handgun, probably doesn't matter so much. Maybe they were also trying to, strike while the iron was hot and the demand was there. That could also be a bit of it as well. Interestingly enough, they gave it these rather large sights that give you a very clear sight picture, and you can't even get much use out of them, ironically enough. You would have thought that they could just economize and not bother, but it is what they did. So as you've no doubt already deduced, these did not do so well on the market. Production ended in 1971. I guess the market did decide there were just too many costs to pay for the compactness and carryability advantages that this gun offered. Sterling, of course, would learn their lesson the very next year, 1972. They would introduce that successful, well, by Sterling standards, the Model 302 pistol. They would also go on to make other 380s of a much more conventional, PPK type layout as well. And that's kind of, the rest is history, I guess, as they say. I guess we can move on to some of the shooting impression portion of this video. So this is an example of a target that I shot. This was only from 7 yards, so very much up close and personal self-defense type distance. The grouping is not as terrible as I would have expected, just based on what I read ahead of time. Of course, as you can see, most of the rounds did indeed keyhole, so that portion of the reputation does hold true. Also, there was kind of a strange malfunction that occurred. On the very last round, most of the time, instead of feeding the last round into the chamber, it would just stovepipe that live round, which is kind of odd. I'm not sure I've seen any other pistol do that before. It could be just a magazine. Of course, I don't have any other magazines to try. I doubt that they're particularly common or easy to find. Maybe I'll take a look. But another kind of thing of note. So this kind of suggests that this really is not the best option as far as for a self-defense handgun, obviously. As far as how it feels to fire the gun, it's not terrible. I thought it would actually be a little bit worse than it was. Because, for instance, just to I have kind of average size hands, I guess. I can't get my full hand around this grip. And it is straight blowback operated, so I thought that it would kind of be snappy, but it really wasn't too bad. If you ever fired something like a Polish P64, those are much worse than this. So not too bad in that regard. So do I recommend you buy one of these things? Well, for any serious purpose, the answer is obviously no. This wasn't a great option in 1968, and it certainly isn't a good one today. There are things that you could find for less that are just going to be orders of magnitude more effective than this, so obviously not in that regard. Now, if you want a niche collectible from a strange and tumultuous time in American history, kind of a footnote in firearms history, then yeah, sure, don't overpay for it. It's kind of an interesting gun. You know, if you see one at a a really good price, maybe it's worth picking up as a curiosity and a novelty. Maybe it'll work a little better than this one does, but yeah, that's kind of the gist of the video, of course. Thank you for watching as always.